The spring of 1885 in Montana was a season of wild and sudden change. One day could be filled with warm, gentle sunshine, and the next could be torn apart by a furious sky. For Matt Cavil, a man who preferred the quiet company of his horse and the open range, the approaching storm was a thing to be outrun. He urged his horse onward, the animal's powerful muscles straining against the tug of the wind that had begun to whip across the grassy hills. The tall pines, which usually stood as quiet sentinels, now swayed and groaned as if in pain. The first cold drops of rain felt like tiny needles against his skin, and he pulled his hat down lower, his eyes scanning the familiar trail for shelter. He was taking a shorter path, one that cut through a less traveled valley, when he saw it. A flash of lightning illuminated the scene for a heart-stopping moment, a small, lonely cabin, its roof and one wall completely crushed by the trunk of a massive old pine tree. It looked as if a giant's fist had smashed it. Matt's first thought was a grim one: no one could have survived that. He was about to ride on, his own survival pressing on his mind, when a sound, thinner and more desperate than the wind, cut through the air. It was a cry. Not an animal, but a human cry, choked with terror. He was off his horse in an instant, his boots sinking into the mud that was already turning into a slick river. He called out, "Hello! Is someone in there?" The only answer was another cry, this one weaker, followed by a soft, wailing sound he recognized as that of a very young baby. A cold dread, far deeper than the chill of the rain, seized him. He ran to the wreckage, his mind racing. The entrance was completely blocked by a tangled mess of splintered logs and a collapsed stone chimney. There was no time to go for help, no time to fetch tools from his ranch miles away. Every moment spent waiting was a moment closer to the end for whoever was trapped inside. So, Matt Cavil, a man built more for riding and roping than for delicate work, dropped to his knees and began to dig. He used his hands, strong and calloused from years of ranch work, as shovels. He clawed at the mud and gravel, pulling aside smaller branches and chunks of sod. The sharp edges of broken wood bit into his palms, leaving smears of blood on the wet wood, but he barely felt the pain. His whole world narrowed to the task of making a hole, of reaching that desperate sound. He worked with a frantic strength, heaving aside a section of collapsed wall to reveal a dark, cramped space beneath. Another lightning flash gave him a glimpse inside. There, huddled in the only dry corner, was a woman. She was curled on her side, her body forming a protective arch over a tiny, blanket-wrapped bundle. Her face was pale, streaked with mud and rain, and her eyes were wide with a fear so profound it struck him like a physical blow. She was shivering violently, her arms locked around her baby. "It's all right," Matt said, his voice low and steady, trying to sound calmer than he felt. "I'm here to get you out. You're going to be all right." He had to break apart more of the wreckage to make an opening wide enough. Finally, he could reach her. He moved slowly, not wanting to startle her. "I need you to hand me the baby first," he said gently. For a long second, she just stared at him, and he saw the struggle in her eyes, the fight between a deep fear of a stranger and the desperate hope for rescue. Hope won. With trembling arms, she lifted the tiny bundle toward him. Matt took the infant, whose cries had softened to whimpers, and carefully placed her in a dry, sheltered spot under his saddle blanket near his horse. Then he turned back for the mother. She was trying to move, but her leg was pinned by a fallen beam. Matt put his shoulder to the heavy timber, grunting with the effort, and pushed until it rolled away with a thick squelch of mud. He then reached in, wrapped his arms around her, and lifted her out of the wreckage as easily as if she were a child. She clung to him, her whole body shaking from cold and shock. He carried her to his horse and set her down gently next to her baby. Without a word, he took off his own thick, wool-lined coat and wrapped it tightly around her shoulders, covering the both of them. The woman, Mercy, looked up at him, her dark eyes filled with a mix of terror, exhaustion, and a dawning, unbelievable relief. The rain was finally beginning to slow, and in the quiet that followed the storm's rage, the only sounds were the drip of water from the trees and the soft, gurgling sound of the baby, safe in her mother's arms. Matt knew his ranch was still a long ride away, but the hardest part was over. He had pulled them from the darkness, and now, he would see them home. The warmth of Matt Cavil's cabin felt like a dream after the nightmare of the storm. The single room, lit by the soft glow of a fireplace and a single kerosene lamp, was a world of order and quiet strength. Rough-hewn log walls held up a sturdy roof, and the scent of wood smoke and coffee hung in the air. Matt moved with a quiet purpose, building the fire higher until the flames crackled and popped, pushing back the deep chill. He had settled Mercy Carter into the single, sturdy chair by the hearth, the thick coat still wrapped around her and the baby, Abigail, who was now sleeping fitfully against her chest. For a long time, silence filled the space, broken only by the fire's hiss and the wind's fading moan outside. Mercy did not speak. Her eyes, wide and dark, followed Matt's every movement with the watchful fear of a wild creature brought suddenly into the light. She flinched when he approached to offer her a tin cup of hot water, her arms tightening instinctively around her daughter. Matt understood. He placed the cup on the floor within her reach and then stepped back, giving her space. He busied himself across the room, checking on the simmering pot of stew, arranging his few spare blankets on the floor near the fire to make a pallet for her, doing anything to show he was no threat. The first night passed in this tense, quiet dance. When Mercy finally slept, it was a restless, exhausted slumber on the blanket pallet, with Abigail cradled in the curve of her arm. Matt did not sleep in his own bed. He sat in the chair, keeping watch over the fire and his unexpected guests, his presence a silent guard against any more dangers the night might hold. The morning brought a pale, clear light. Mercy awoke to find Matt already outside, tending to his horse and the morning chores. A simple bowl of oatmeal and another cup of hot water waited for her on the hearthstone. Her body ached in 100 different places, and a dark bruise was blooming on her leg where the beam had pinned her. As the days turned into a week, a slow and careful routine began to establish itself. Matt would leave food and fresh water for her. He would chop wood outside the door, his axe falls a steady, rhythmic sound of normalcy. He never pressed her with questions, never demanded conversation. Her trust was earned in small, quiet moments. One afternoon, he returned from checking his traps with a dead rabbit. He sat on the porch, skinning it with a sharp knife. Instead of staying inside, Mercy, drawn by a need to be useful, ventured out and sat on a bench a few feet away, watching him work. He didn't look at her, but he began to speak in a low, even tone, explaining how to best prepare the hide for tanning, how to cook the meat so it would be tender. It wasn't a conversation, but it was a connection. Another time, he came in from the rain to find her standing, swaying gently, trying to soothe a fussy Abigail. Without a word, he took a clean cloth from a shelf, soaked it in fresh milk from his cow, and handed it to her, showing her how to let the baby suckle the moisture from it. It was a simple act of kindness, a solution to a problem she had been too proud or too scared to voice. A small, grateful smile, the first he had seen, touched her lips for a fleeting second. Slowly, she began to change from a ghost in his home to a person within it. She started to tidy the cabin while he was out. She would wash the few dishes and sweep the hard-packed dirt floor with a broom made of twigs. One evening, she took over the stirring of the stew pot, adding a pinch of wild herbs she had found drying on a shelf. The gesture was small, but it spoke volumes. She was no longer just a victim he had saved, she was becoming a part of the life of the cabin. One evening, as they sat by the fire after Abigail had fallen asleep, she finally spoke of her past. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. She told him of her journey west with her husband, a man full of dreams for a homestead of their own. She spoke of the fever that had taken him quickly and mercilessly, leaving her alone and with child in a vast, unforgiving land. She told him of the desperate struggle to survive in that old, crumbling cabin, a fight she had been slowly losing until the storm and his arrival. She did not cry, but the pain was raw in her voice. Matt listened, his quiet attention a comfort. He didn't offer empty words, only the solid, quiet strength of his presence. In the warmth of that fire, surrounded by the quiet sounds of the night, the last walls of fear and uncertainty began to crumble, replaced by the slow, steady-growing foundation of trust. The thaw came, not just to the land, but to the life within the cabin. The deep snows retreated, revealing patches of wet, dark earth, and the creek swelled with icy, rushing water. With the change of season, the careful distance between Matt and Mercy began to melt away, replaced by the easy rhythm of shared labor. It was no longer his cabin, but their shelter, no longer his chores, but their daily life. Mercy's strength returned, fueled by good food and a newfound sense of safety. She no longer waited for Matt to provide. One morning, she simply walked outside, her daughter Abigail tied snugly to her chest with a length of cloth, and began to clear the small, overgrown vegetable patch beside the cabin. Matt, seeing her from the corral, felt a strange, warm feeling bloom in his chest. He fetched a spare hoe and worked beside her, turning the dark soil without a word needing to be spoken between them. He showed her how to tell the good earth from the rocky clay, and she, in turn, had a gentle way with the seeds, planting them with a care he had never possessed. Abigail was growing, too, changing from a quiet, sleepy baby into a bright-eyed infant who watched the world with curious wonder. Her first true, gummy smile was directed not at her mother, but at Matt. He had been chopping wood, and when he paused to wipe his brow, he caught her staring at him from where she lay on a blanket. He made a silly face, wrinkling his nose, and the baby let out a delighted gurgle, her whole face lighting up. The sound was so pure, so full of joy, that it stopped him in his tracks. From then on, it became his mission to earn that smile each day. He would carve a small, smooth wooden bird for her to hold, or he would sit in the evening and rock her in his strong arms, humming a tuneless, rumbling song that always seemed to soothe her. Mercy would watch them, her heart feeling so full she thought it might burst. Their conversations, once so rare and careful, now flowed as easily as the creek outside. They talked of practical things, where to build a proper chicken coop, whether the summer would be dry or wet, but also of smaller, softer things. Mercy told him stories her own mother had told her, and Matt shared his dream of one day breeding a line of horses known for their calm strength and intelligence. They were building a world together, piece by piece, word by word. The turning point came on an evening painted in the gold and purple of a late spring sunset. The day's work was done, and Abigail was asleep in a wooden crate that served as her crib. Mercy was mending a tear in Matt's shirt by the light of the fire, her needle moving in and out of the fabric in a steady rhythm. Matt watched her, the way the firelight caught the strands of her hair, the quiet concentration on her face. He realized that this scene, this woman in his home, this child sleeping peacefully, was everything he had never known he wanted. He stood up and walked over to her, his movements slow and deliberate. He knelt down on the floor beside her chair, so that his eyes were level with hers. She looked up from her mending, her hand stilling, a question in her gentle eyes. "This cabin," he began, his voice low and a little rough. "For so long, it was just 4 walls and a roof. A place to sleep out of the rain." He paused, searching for the right words. "But since you and Abigail came, it's become a home. You've filled it with a warmth I didn't know was missing." He reached out, his large, calloused hand covering her smaller one where it rested on the mended shirt. His touch was warm and solid. Mercy's breath caught in her throat. She could see the truth of his words shining in his honest eyes. "My heart has found its home with you, Mercy," he whispered. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of a happiness so profound it felt like healing. She leaned forward, her free hand coming up to rest against his stubbled cheek. "And mine with you, Matt," she breathed. Then, he closed the small space between them. Their kiss was not rushed or fierce, but soft and searching, a gentle promise spoken without words. It was a kiss that held the memory of the storm, the gratitude of survival, the shared struggles of the past months, and the bright, hopeful dawn of a future they would build together. In that quiet moment, by the warmth of the hearth, their friendship deepened into something stronger and more beautiful, weaving their 2 lonely lives into the beginning of a single, unbreakable story. The first true snows of winter came early that year, not with the gentle flakes of autumn, but with a fierce, howling determination that piled deep, silent drifts against the cabin walls. Inside, the world had shrunk to the circle of firelight and the sturdy log walls that held back the cold. For weeks, their life was a cozy routine of wood cutting, stew making, and the quiet joy of their own company. Matt had never known a winter to feel so warm. But the wilderness, for all its beauty, was never truly tamed, and its challenges could slip in as silently as the frost under the door. It began with a whimper. Little Abigail, who had been learning to pull herself up on the furniture, became unusually still and fussy. Mercy laid a worried hand on her forehead and found it burning with a dry, unnatural heat. The baby's usual bright-eyed curiosity was gone, replaced by a glassy, distant look. They tried all the simple remedies they knew. Matt melted clean snow for cool water, and Mercy bathed the child's small, feverish body with a damp cloth, her own heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. But the fever did not break. It clung to Abigail, deepening as the short day faded into another long, terrifying night. Outside, the wind began to scream, hurling fresh snow against the single window. A trip to town for the doctor was an impossible dream. It was a full day's ride in good weather, and now the trail would be buried, the landmarks obscured, the risk of getting lost and freezing to death a near certainty. They were utterly alone. The cozy cabin now felt like a trap, the walls pressing in with their helplessness. For 2 days and 2 nights, a grim vigil was held. The fire was kept roaring, yet a chill seemed to have taken root in the very air. Mercy never left Abigail's side, her voice growing hoarse from singing soft lullabies and whispering pleas and promises. She would dribble cool water between the baby's parched lips, her hands trembling with fear and exhaustion. Matt was a constant, solid presence, his own fear held tightly in check. He took turns holding the feverish child, his large, work-roughened hands impossibly gentle as he rocked her. He would press his cheek against her hot forehead, his own heart aching with a love so fierce it was a kind of pain. He ventured out into the blinding whiteness to fetch more water from the creek, breaking through a skin of ice, his own breath freezing in his beard. He did not speak of his fear, but his actions screamed it. He was fighting an enemy he could not see or wrestle, an enemy that was stealing the light from their little girl's eyes. He would return to the cabin, stomping the snow from his boots, his gaze immediately seeking mercies for any sign of hope. There was none. On the second night, Abigail's breathing became a thin, raspy wheeze. Her tiny body was listless, and she would no longer take even a sip of water. Despair, cold and heavy, settled in the room. Mercy finally broke, silent tears carving paths through her weariness as she held her daughter. Matt came to kneel beside them, wrapping his strong arms around both of them, his head bowed. In that moment, they were not just two people, but a single unit of shared terror and unwavering love. It was in the deepest, darkest hour of that night, with the fire burned down to embers, that Mercy, half asleep from sheer exhaustion, felt a change. The frantic heat coming from Abigail's skin seemed to have lessened. She sat up, her heart in her throat, and pressed her lips to the baby's forehead. It was damp with sweat. She shook Matt awake, her voice a cracked whisper. "Matt." "Her fever." He was instantly alert. Together, they worked anew, their movements now fueled by a fragile, desperate hope. They wiped the sweat from the baby's body, bundled her in a dry, warm blanket, and Mercy held her close, offering a prayer of thanks to the quiet cabin walls. As the first gray light of dawn touched the window, Abigail's eyes fluttered open. They were weak, but they were clear. She let out a soft, mewling cry, the most beautiful sound they had ever heard, and turned her head, seeking her mother's milk. The storm inside had broken. The resilience of a tiny child, nurtured by the relentless, loving care of her parents, had won. Matt and Mercy looked at each other across the sleeping child, and in that look passed 1,000 unspoken words. They had faced the abyss together, and their bond, forged in the fire of shared fear, had been tempered into something as strong and unyielding as the mountains themselves. The long winter finally loosened its grip, surrendering to a spring that felt more precious and vibrant than any before. The memory of Abigail's sickness was a fading scar, a reminder of a battle they had fought and won together. It had changed something fundamental between Matt and Mercy. The easy comfort of their life before was now layered with a deeper, more profound understanding. They had looked into the face of potential loss and knew, without a single doubt, that the greatest loss would be to lose each other. This knowledge hung in the air between them, a quiet, unspoken question that needed an answer. Matt began to spend his evenings by the fire working on a new project. He took a piece of fine-grained pine and, with his whittling knife, began to carve. At first, it was just a smooth, rounded shape, but slowly, under his careful hands, it began to transform. He would sand it for hours, the gentle rasping sound a familiar comfort in the cabin, until the wood was as smooth as river stone. Mercy would watch him, her mending forgotten in her lap, curious about this sudden, focused hobby. He was a man of action, of building fences and breaking horses, not of small, delicate creation. But he never offered an explanation, and she never asked, sensing it was a private thing. One evening, he was called away to help a neighbor mend a broken wagon axle. He was gone for 2 days, and the cabin felt strangely empty without his solid presence. On the afternoon of his return, the sun was warm, and the world was washed clean by a recent rain. The sky was a deep, endless blue, and the first brave wildflowers were dotting the green meadows. Mercy was outside, hanging laundry on a line strung between two pines, the scent of sun-warmed cotton and damp earth filling the air. Abigail, now a sturdy toddler, was toddling through the grass, chasing a slow-moving butterfly. They heard the familiar sound of Matt's horse before they saw him. He rode into the yard, his face tired from the journey but his eyes alight with a purpose Mercy had never seen before. He dismounted, but instead of heading to the cabin, he walked straight towards her. He took her hand, his own still dusty from the trail, and his calloused fingers closed gently around hers. "Come with me," he said, his voice low and serious. He led her away from the laundry, away from the cabin, to a small rise at the edge of the meadow where a single, ancient oak tree stood sentinel. From here, they could see the whole of his land, the rolling hills, the silver thread of the creek, the cabin with its plume of smoke looking small and peaceful in the vastness. It was the view he loved most in the world. Abigail, seeing her father, gave up her chase and plopped down contentedly in the clover at their feet. Matt turned to face Mercy, holding both of her hands now. The Montana breeze played with strands of her hair, and the setting sun cast a golden light upon her face. He looked into her eyes, and she saw a nervousness there that was entirely new, mixed with a determination that took her breath away. "Mercy," he began, his voice slightly unsteady. "When I found you in that broken cabin, I thought I was just saving a life. I didn't know I was saving my own." He took a deep breath. "You have brought a light into this house, into my heart, that I never knew was missing. You and Abigail, you are my world. This ranch, this land, it means nothing without you to share it with." He released one of her hands and reached into the pocket of his worn leather vest. He pulled out the object he had been carving for so many weeks. It was a ring, simple and beautiful, fashioned from the smooth, pale pine. It was not a fancy ring from a jeweler's shop, but it was perfect, carved with a delicate pattern of oak leaves and acorns, a symbol of the strength and enduring life of the tree that sheltered them now. His eyes never left hers as he held it out. "My heart has been yours since the moment you first trusted me with your daughter. Will you do me the greatest honor? Will you be my wife?" Tears, not of sorrow or fear, but of a joy so complete it felt like coming home, filled Mercy's eyes and spilled down her cheeks. She did not need to think. The answer had been growing in her heart with every sunrise they had shared, every challenge they had faced side by side. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Oh, Matt, yes." He slipped the wooden ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. And then he leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that was a seal upon their promise, a kiss that held the memory of the storm, the warmth of the fireside, the terror of the sickbed, and the brilliant, unshakable hope of all their tomorrows. It was a kiss that felt like a beginning, the true start of their life as one. In the quiet of the meadow, with their daughter playing at their feet and their future stretching out before them as wide and as beautiful as the land itself, they stood together, bound not by chance, but by choice, and by a love as strong and as deep-rooted as the ancient oak above them. The small church in Pine Creek had never seen such a gathering of quiet joy. Sunlight streamed through the single, clear window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny fairies. Mr. Higgins, the storekeeper, stood stiffly in his best suit, beaming as he gave the bride away. His wife sniffled happily into a lace handkerchief. But all Matt could see was Mercy, standing before him in a simple, homespun dress the color of cream, a few late-blooming wildflowers tucked into her dark hair. The wooden ring he had carved felt solid and right on her finger, a promise more meaningful to them than any band of gold. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Matt's kiss was gentle, a public seal on a truth their hearts had known for years. The celebration was a simple picnic on the church lawn, with a cake baked by Mrs. Higgins and well wishes from the handful of townsfolk who had come to know the quiet cowboy and his resilient family. The seasons turned in their endless, graceful circle, each one layering new memories upon the foundation of their life together. The ranch was no longer just Matt's, it was the Cavil family ranch. A proper barn was raised with the help of neighbors, its loft filled with sweet-smelling hay. The vegetable garden Mercy had started now flourished, providing beans, corn, and squash for their table and for trade. Abigail grew from a toddler into a lively young girl, her laughter echoing across the yard as she helped her mother gather eggs or followed her father on his rounds, her small hand lost in his large, protective one. On a warm afternoon, several years after their wedding, the sounds of construction once again filled the air. But this was not the building of a barn or a fence. Matt was behind the cabin, his tools scattered around him, putting the final touches on a wooden swing he had fashioned from a smooth plank and two strong ropes hung from the limb of a great oak tree. Abigail, now 6 years old with her mother's thoughtful eyes and her father's sturdy build, watched with eager anticipation. "Is it ready, Pa? Is it ready?" she chirped, hopping from one foot to the other. "Just about, little one," Matt chuckled, giving the final nod a firm tug. He lifted her onto the seat, her small hands gripping the ropes tightly. With a gentle push, he sent her soaring into the air, her squeals of delight mixing with the rustling of the leaves above. The sound was the very music of a happy childhood. From the porch of the cabin, Mercy watched them, a soft, contented smile on her face. One hand rested lightly on the swell of her belly, where a new life, a brother or sister for Abigail, was growing strong. The other hand absently twisted the simple wooden ring on her finger, its surface now worn smooth with years of love and work. Her gaze swept over the scene, her husband, strong and kind, her daughter, full of joy, and the home they had built together, not just from logs and mortar, but from trust, from resilience, and from a love that had been forged in a spring storm and had only deepened with each passing season. They had faced the wilderness and its many challenges, and they had not just survived, they had thrived. Their story was one of hope found in the most desperate of moments, of a family created not by blood alone, but by choice and by unwavering commitment. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Matt left Abigail on the swing and came to stand beside his wife, slipping his arm around her shoulders. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their daughter fly through the air, their hearts full to bursting with a peace that was as deep and as enduring as the Montana hills around them. Their journey had been long, from a collapsed cabin to this porch filled with love, and it was a story with the happiest of endings, a testament to the fact that the greatest adventures often begin with an act of kindness. If you enjoyed following Matt and Mercy's journey of love and resilience in the untamed wilderness, and you'd like to read more stories like this one, be sure to subscribe for future tales. New chapters of hope and happiness are always on the horizon, waiting to be shared.